In what way, man?
We've got Tamer Hassan, the actor. You can see him currently in 24, the new series of that one being currently filmed in London. And we've got Vicky Beeching, who is a regular here doing the papers. Tamer, your first one. Very good seeing you, my friend.
Yeah.
We're going to start now with Tamer's used to playing bad guys on screen. This guy's a bad guy in real life.
Yes, so this guy is on the run. His name's Arnold Pickering, and he was jailed in 1990 for the stabbing of a disabled man. He's on the run after being let out on day release, and the thing that's really shocking people is that actually this is the 4th time that he's done a runner and tried to escape. So it's raising massive questions about day release, whether or not it's a good idea. Only a fortnight ago, you remember that we had Michael Wheatley, a.k.a. Skullcracker, what a great name. He was on the run from day release. So it's really raising questions because it's so important that we rehabilitate prisoners, that we make that transition from being in prison to going back into the real world, you know, as smooth as possible. But this kind of taking advantage of it in this way, I think really diminishes the chances of others, because if we're not careful, day release is going to be limited and that rehabilitation will be stopped.
Is a murderer. He's a convicted murderer. Damien Langiano says, whatever happened to locking the door and throwing away the key? Jill says, why are prisoners getting day release? They should be behind bars until they have completed their sentence. So where would you differ on what those folk are saying?
Case by case, I'd say, wouldn't you? I think it should be case by case. I mean, the bottom line is if we're going to rehabilitate prisoners, they should have some kind of way of easing them back in to society, obviously. I mean, whether it's a halfway house or whatever. But I think psychopaths and convicted murderers of this calibre, I mean, look, at the end of the day, if he's going to do his sentence, do his sentence. If you're going to release him. But it's obvious the temptation's got to be too strong for him to come back.
If he's given into that temptation 3 times previously, you'd think they might not have that particular form of rehab for him. But there's a different, better form.
Yeah, got the Justice Secretary, Chris Grayling, 8:30 this morning on the programme. Tamer, front page of the Daily Express, battle to halt the house price boom. What's your take on this one?
My biggest concern is the future of our kids.
Yeah.
And buying houses. I mean, it's okay, people talking about interest rates going up and down. It's always going to be that way, and we're always going to complain about house prices going up, especially in London. The rest of the country, it's easier to live, and people say, well, just move up to Liverpool, move up. But I was born and bred in London. I want to live in London, and I'm sure my kids are exactly the same. So my biggest concern with this is how are they going to help the future of our kids? I mean, is it going to be down to the parents to now start saving money for kids' mortgages and deposit monies? You know, how is that going to be affected? That's my biggest concern about this whole housing boom and these interest rates going up and down. So that,
it's just so scary to think that interest rates could be potentially in a year or two's time back at the sort of 7% area, which means that people's mortgages totally unaffordable, and they just won't be able to pay them.
I'm hearing horrific prices like Knightsbridge and these sort of places. A studio flat's like 1.2 million.
It is. No, it totally is.
Insane. And they're bringing in these new taxes. I mean, and a lot of these people as well, which people ain't realising, there's a lot of kids and people have inherited these houses, and now they're bringing in some kind of a new tax on the value of the house. Now, if you're living in this house, and OK, you might not have any money, there's kids that are living in these houses that are, you know, on social and stuff. I mean, you know, because their parents, if there's old money involved, how are they going to afford to pay these new taxes that are bringing in? They might get thrown out of their houses.
I saw an initiative in the paper yesterday from the YMCA, and they're buying in these purpose-built porta cabins, for want of a better word, but anyway, they've got 1 bedroom, they've got all the living facilities.
Is that the red and black box?
Yeah,
I saw that. Yeah.
30,000 quid they would cost, and they would rent them. I think it's about £400 a week. They would rent them in London. We're talking about the Merton area, and I thought to myself, you've got to think differently about these things.
And the problem really is in London. So I think one of the questions is, do we treat the housing bubble as a national problem? Because it's not necessarily. It really is quite specific. So we almost need a different set of rules within London.
The problem is as well as the land. The houses, to build the houses can be quite cheap, because I know a lot of builders and people that do it. But to build, you want a house, you've got 300,000 to build. The land, we was looking at some land, it's like 700,000 for like a tiny bit of land to build a 4-bedroom house on. That's what the problem is. I mean, we might as well start inventing floating houses.
Indeed. Well, that might be the next thing.
On the Thames, on stills, on the moon.
Houses.
Nigel Farage, he's saying now that he was tired out when he made this outburst about Romanians on LBC last week.
Yes, so last week he was interviewed by James O'Brien. It was a great interview, and James took a very clever line of argument, calling Nigel Farage out on his racist comments, saying, well, you've got a German wife, your wife is actually bilingual, she probably speaks German in public, and Farage had obviously been criticising people speaking foreign languages in, on the tube and around London. So he's now backtracking. The main thing he said that was really unpleasant was that there was a kind of qualitative difference between immigrants, that it wasn't just about the quantity of people coming in, but he was contrasting Romanians versus Germans, saying, the quality is different between the two, which is terrible. But he's now saying he was tired, and he's allegedly saying he wasn't referring to Romanians in general. This was Romanian criminal gangs, but somehow he forgot to say that. So I wonder, in terms of the holograms we were just talking about, maybe it might be safer for UKIP if they actually had a hologram of Nigel Farage, who was pre-programmed to say the right thing, because he clearly hasn't in this case.
A lot of people out, that would.
But they all come across like that anyway. They're all pre-programmed. The frustration about talking to any of them is, at least whether you agree with him or not, he's different. And the rest of them, they just churn out the same things. The most insulting thing for a viewer or for an interviewer is to ask them a question and they repeat and they repeat and they repeat, and then they lecture you with what people really want to know. What people really... No, we don't really want to talk about that. I want to talk about this.
It's sort of refreshing in that way, and he has actually said in this interview that he sometimes gets it wrong and says stupid things, which in a sense is quite refreshing. I mean, you don't hear many
the rest of them get it
that.
right, and they still say stupid things. So, what is there to choose between any of them? Brooklyn Beckham, what do you think of this? So, OK, his parents are multi-millionaires, and they still say, look, son, go out and get a job and work in a coffee shop.
It's just a little bit concerning to me for the kids' safety that somebody like David Beckham and Victoria, who are lovely, I'm sure, and great parents, as you can see, sending their little boy out to work in a coffee shop.
What, really? That's your reaction, that it's not safe?
I think it's right to teach your kids the value of money, but I think for me as a parent, when my kids were growing up, I was scared to even show them on Twitter and stuff because of the abuse they're going to get with trolls and stuff. It's not the thought of kidnapping or whatever, anything like that can happen, God forbid. But for me, it's the attack that they're going to get.
Well, the intention's good, but as soon as somebody finds out where the lad is...
all of a sudden they're going to be there, the kids are going to get harassed.
It's
just a safety.
Celebrities' children are so often confused and muddled because they never get to live a normal life.
Maybe it is important to sort of get them out to actually meet a real variety of customers.
But the thing is, David and Posh are down to earth. I've met them, they're down to earth, they're people, they're sort of...
Keeping it real. Vicky, I want a quick word just before we go to the break, a very quick word about the lollipop ladies and men who have been axed in the past 4 years. They earn on average about £3,000 a year, but cuts dictate that 1,000 of them have gone around the country in that time.
It's one of those small cuts, I think, that gradually chips away at society. And there's a couple of stories within this piece about kids that have actually suffered through not having a lollipop person. I noticed that it says lollipop ladies, and the inner feminist in me rises up and said it should be lollipop people, because there obviously are lollipop men as well. But in terms of taking a lollipop person away, in one town, 2 kids were actually hit by a van and suffered, bruising and broken teeth, so quite worrying.
OK, big reaction to this this morning. We're going to reflect that later on in the programme. We're also talking about working. We've talked about young people working. We've talked about people who can't get jobs. And we're talking about one elderly lady who's got Tamar's eye, who's working, and she's in her 80s. Will you find out what she's working at? Oh, yes, that is the point after this. Don't go away. Tamar Hassan and Vicky Beeching, they've got the newspapers for you this morning. And Vicky, airbags. This story's in The Guardian.
This is incredible. So there's never been any success at making cycle helmets fashion items because they can, squash your hair down. A lot of people don't like wearing them, so says this article. And this is a new breakthrough. It's actually airbag technology for cyclists. So
if we look at this, the girl on the left is the hood, the bag is in that thing around her neck.
It is. So that's what it looks like on the left when you're wearing it. And then when it inflates, it looks like the one on the right. The only downside is it's £299, and once it's inflated once, it's actually out of action. And it takes quite a lot of faith, I think, to believe that it is going to be there for you in your moment of need. But people are just hoping it will save lives and make you feel less constrained. So you can still look well,
it doesn't damage your hair in any way, and then when you need it, it goes into action. What girl wouldn't pay £299 to have
Sounds like I need one.
Right, now...
Oh, gosh.
I hate to tell you, I've met this woman.
Uh-oh.
Only, I was going to say professionally, but I don't mean like that. I mean actually
There's a story
interviewing
there,
her. This is Sheila Vogelkoop, and she's a great-grandmother. She's working, what does she work at, or where is she different at 85?
She's, this really made me laugh, and this is the funny bit, is how is she a lady of the night? I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's very
Professional
dark.
lady of the night. I do understand about fetishes and stuff like that and people's tastes, but sleeping with... Yeah, everybody has a little bit of something inside them. I won't go into it because it's too early, but sleeping with men as young as 20 for £200 a night, how?
Well, it's the men as young as 20 you've got to ask the question to. Sheila says, I love sex and I know I am very, very sexy.
I'm sure you are, my love, but I remember what I used to think of my granny when I was a young kid, and it definitely wasn't that, so.
Definitely not it. OK. Matt.
Your average.
There's no kind of segue between that and the sport.
Yeah,
Really,
save
so
me.
I'll just get on with it. Let's have a look at the back of the mirror. All the papers talking about Arsene Wenger's new contract at Arsenal this morning. They reckon that within 72 hours he will sign a contract worth a reported £24 million over 3 years off the back of their FA Cup win on the weekend, of course. So he's kind of riding high on this kind of wave. And he's also going to get a bit of a war chest to go out and buy, he says, up to 3 new players to bolster their chances for the Premier League next season. So good news for Arsenal fans.
Excited about that, yeah.
You would think.
OK. Vicky and Tamar, they're going to be back at 20 to 8 this morning with more in the newspapers. We cross over to Nazanin now because it looks as though it's going to be a really, really nice day today.